Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Categorically Romance Podcast. My name is Bree, and I am so excited for today's episode. I am joined by, for the first time, author Jen Bokal is here. Jennifer Bokal is here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you. I'm happy to be here.
And returning is one of our listener faves, author Anna J. Stewart. Welcome back, Anna.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
Both of y'all, we'll start with you, Jennifer.
Yes.
How has 2023 been?
So personally, the first half of 2023 was amazing. I was telling Anna that my husband retired. He was an FBI agent, was an agent for 30 years, retired on December 31st, 2022. We went to Florida for a few weeks. We went to Great Britain for a few weeks. I wrote actually one of my favorite books that just came out. I wrote that at the beginning of the year. And then the second half of the year, my husband, who is, like I said, retired, was volunteers for Habitat for Humanity. And he left the work site and wrecked his motorcycle. And that was the end of May. And then like June, July, and a lot of August was all about getting him back to physical health.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so I'm hoping it'll end on a high note.
Okay, we're going to make this happen. It's going to end on a high note,
Okay,
okay?
good, yeah. So it's on a high note. So, but yeah, work is always good. And I'm happy to be writing romantic suspense for Harlequin. And yeah, so mostly positive, but the motorcycle accident definitely changed the trajectory of the year. We'll just put it that way. Yeah,
definitely.
Boy.
Well, I'm glad that he's okay. Definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
Anna, how has 2023 been for you?
Not too bad. It's been since COVID hit, a lot of my life has been roller coaster up and down. My mom's had a lot of health issues and heart issues primarily. Thank God neither one of us has had COVID yet. So I think we've dodged a bullet there, hopefully, at least for now. But it's just learning how to write because usually I'm like one of those people, like the very smallest thing is going to throw me off for the entire day. It's a great excuse and a procrastination excuse. But I've gotten to the point now where that isn't possible. Mm-hmm. And I have to learn how to work with the unexpected popping up. Unexpected doctor's appointments or, something that comes up where I just can't get to the computer at the time I normally would. So it's been a bit of a learning curve this year, but I think I'm finally finding my footing, which is good. And I hope I don't need to have that footing for next year. But yeah, I'm relatively pleased with how this year has gone. Definitely better than the last couple.
Well, what are you both working on? So, Jen, what do you have? What are you cooking up?
What am I cooking up? So I just turned in a book for the Coltons of Owl Creek, which, if you're not familiar with the Coltons books, there is, they call it a continuity. They release one a month for an entire year. And each author writes a different book. And everybody is somehow related to one another. And then there is an overarching villain and crime that is being like slowly unraveled and investigated. But then you have a new love interest in each book. And I just turned that one in, which I loved writing. I always loved doing continuities. I like working with the other authors. And then I am writing a Texas Law miniseries. I did 3 books that came out over the past 2 years. And then I'm working currently on the first book and the second miniseries that just continues that story. And it's all centered around a serial killer who is a descendant of Jack the Ripper and is determined to make himself the most famous serial killer of all time.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
yeah.
Makes that an auto buy. Thanks,
Right.
Jen.
Yeah. And then it's in like, and I always love like rural settings. So it's in like rural Texas and, you know, and I have a great cast of characters. Yeah. So that's what I'm working on.
Oh my gosh. Well, I live in Texas, so give me
Oh,
all
do
the
you?
rural serial killers in Texas.
Yeah. Oh, I will have to come. Part of I've made up my little small towns. They're kind of in Texas hill country,
Hmm.
and then but part of it's set in San Antonio.
That's where I am.
Which I've never visited. You know, I've done like my Google research. I've never visited, but you're so lucky. What a charming city it looks like.
Yeah.
The serial killers aside, but what a charming city.
Oh, give me all the fictional serial killers here. It's
Yeah,
fine. I need the escape.
yeah, yeah. So, anyways, yeah. So, how funny. Good.
Anna, what about you? What are you cooking up?
So let's see. I just had 2 books come out last month. I love it when I get a heartwarming and a romantic suspense out in the same month because it cuts down on my promo time. And also it's like, hey, look at both sides of my personality on display at one time. So my 7th book in the Honor Bound series for romantic suspense, which is, oh my God, which one is it? Nope. Deadly Vegas Escapade. And I called this one My Hangover Meets the Bourne Identity. It was
Ooh,
just
Yes.
so much. Yeah. And I hate the amnesia tropes, but this is the second one I've written, and I actually blame the Coltons for actually turning me around on the whole amnesia trope.
oh,
Because my
yeah.
first Colton book, I was given an amnesia trope to write. And so I got to use it again with this one. So, and then the 8th and the final book in the Honor Bound series will be out in December, and that's Detectives Deadly Secrets. And it wraps up the 8-book series and brings back all of the characters. It was the most fun I had writing an epilogue because I got to bring everybody back, and it's an update on everybody. But before you get to that point, it's Eamon's story, who's pretty much been in the background since book 3. He's an FBI agent, and it was his sister who got the whole his sister's murder who got the whole series start in the beginning. So when he popped up in book 3, I'm like, oh yeah, he's going to go last. He's going to close out the series. So I gave him a really interesting heroine. She's newly sober. She's kind of walking a tightrope of, dealing with addiction and destroying her career as a police officer, and trying to find out what really happened to her husband who was killed. So it kind of got a kitchen sink book feel to it, but it was so much fun to write because I got to bring everybody back and wrap up the happily ever after. And it actually will also launch a hero for my new series, which will start next year, which is the McKenna Code. And that one I call, I call that Blue Bloods meets FBI. Because I love it. Has the family feel of Blue Bloods. Like the matriarch is a police commissioner, and she has a mandatory monthly dinner with everybody. So wherever they are, they have to find a way to get back for monthly dinner. Otherwise it's hell to pay. But then of course they're all in different branches of law enforcement. So that'll just be 4 books, but it gives me the opportunity to bring in the honor bound characters here and there too. So, that's for romantic suspense. And then with heartwarming, like I said, I had my 2nd book in the Hawaii series come out, which is their Surprise Island Wedding.
That series is just amazing so far.
Oh, thank you. So yeah. Book 3, the cover for book 3, I am just so over the moon about because it just looks so much fun. And that one is out in March, I think. And this is one of the fun bits about having a really awesome editor who understands when you're going totally off the rails, because I was trying to write book 4 and it was not coming together. I wrote the first 50 pages 6 times. Nothing was working. And finally my editor says, I don't need this till January. Why don't you work on something else and just put this aside?
Nice.
The most polite
Wasn't
way of
it?
saying, just take a break from this, okay?
It's exactly what, yeah, it's exact. She goes, okay, calm down. You've got other books you have to write for me, so let's try something else. And so now I'm currently writing the next Blackwell book, which will be out next September. And I am having so much fun with it. And I think it's because I'm not supposed to be writing it. It wasn't next on the schedule. I mean, it was supposed to be, but, and then I kind of missed the deadline for it. I thought I had an extra month. This is how 2023 has gone, where I always think I have more time than I do. And I'm like, oh, I don't have to worry. It's not due till December 2nd. And then I turned the page on my calendar on November 1st and it said, oh, Blackwell is due today.
Oh
and
my gosh.
I'm like, I said, I'm just kind of like, I'm not going to make it because, really haven't started it yet. But oh my God, I love my editor so much. And I emailed her and I said, so small problem. And she says, you know what? And I took such comfort in this. She says, since COVID, she has had such a hard time keeping track of days. She says she seems to lose days. And that's exactly what it felt like I had done. So she said, and I fortunately, I can write really fast if it's going well. Like I could write a book in a month. It's not that hard because I'm very lucky. I'm not married. I don't have kids. I just have my mom to worry about. And as long as she stays, relatively happy and healthy, I can write. So that's what I'm currently writing now. And I'm having the best time. I think this might be my favorite Blackwell book that I've written. And for those who haven't heard of the Blackwells, it's a continuity series I write with Melinda Curtis, Amy Vestine, Carol Ross, and Carrie Lynn Webb. And they're Westerns and they take different branches of the Blackwell family that we created. And this one's called the Blackwell Bells. And it's 5 sisters who grew up as a trick writing performing group. And at one point they splintered. There was a big blow up in the family and the whole group busted up. And now it's kind of the mom is struggling to bring all the kids back because she's being inducted into the Cowgirl Hall of Fame and she wants the girls to perform and none of the girls are talking to her. So it's a reconciliation tour kind of thing that she's going around to each of the sisters.
Oh, that is going to be so fun.
I love that.
Yeah. So we've got
That's
Big E
great.
coming back in his RV and they're driving around the country trying to reconcile with all the girls and bring the family back together. We've got returning characters from the other series. So, and this one, I'm just having the best time writing it. And I think it's showing on the page. So, and again, I think it's because I'm really not supposed to be writing it, even though it was
You're
due
such a rule
last
breaker,
month.
Anna.
I didn't used to be, I used to be, okay, these are my deadlines. I'm going to meet them. It's my job. I have to do that. Yeah. And then you know what? Reality hits and everything goes off the rails, and then to top all that off, I'm releasing my second single title, Romantic Suspense, in a couple of weeks. And I'm like, oh, promo, I need to get going on that.
Yeah.
So, this is a crazy business. It is just a crazy business, but it's also the best business. So.
Well, I do kind of want to touch on the promo, so I'll pin that and I'll try to remember it later. But let's start here. So as I shared, we were chatting before we hit record. I've been getting a lot of messages about people that are interested in learning what category is. And I have not done the best about being active online since I went back to work. But I do know from people I follow and just chatting with friends, a lot of romance girlies are in their romantic suspense era. Like they have discovered their love of romantic suspense. And I just thought, okay, I messaged you, Anna, and I was like, we need to do this thing. And thank you, Jennifer, for jumping on board. I wanted to start this this category conversation of what is it for people that haven't read it before. I wanted to start with romantic suspense. So let's start with category in general. Sarah and I have chatted about doing some things, but I'm happy that you two are here because I know Sarah loves romantic suspense. But how do you, for anybody that hasn't read it, category, explain it to them.
So now we're very quiet. We had lots to say a second ago, and now we're very quiet. So I would say category is the way I sort of think about it is in general, not necessarily just with Harlequin, but in general, it's stories and a subgenre of romance. So category could be contemporary, a category could be historical, a category could be romantic suspense, a category could be inspirational romance. And so that's kind of how I think about it. Or when I first started writing romance, and people would say, category, I like that's how I came to understand it. And then Harlequin has just done a very good job of bringing writers who write the same in the same subgenre together, and marketing those books and releasing, like with romantic suspense, we release 4 books a month. I think Heartwarming releases 6 books a month, but
4.
Anna can tell you. Oh, 4 also.
Yeah, it's 4. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, or like medical romance as a category. So I don't know. Now you can expand on that, Anna, and tell them what I got right and what I got wrong.
You didn't get anything wrong. I absolutely love that. I don't think I could have described it as succinctly. The only thing I would add to it is that I think category romances tend to be very trope heavy, meaning that there's a shorthand or like a code to what kind of story it is. Like, and I don't know why this always pops into my head, but marriage of convenience. I've never written a marriage of convenience. I don't even really like the trope personally, but it tells you exactly what kind of story that you're getting. And I think with category romance, Harlequin in particular is very particular about letting you know through the title, the back blurb, and the cover exactly what you're getting. And they do that by highlighting the tropes and the type of story is this. Secret baby, or like I said, marriage of convenience, or friends to lovers, or enemies to lovers. Anything. And tropes actually are very helpful for writers because it helps you keep on track with the goal, motivation, and conflict and actually writing the story. But for me, I think when I'm thinking category, I'm thinking it's a very boy, that was Freudian, a very trope forward type of romance. And they're also shorter. Category romance tends to be 70,000. I wish it was 70 words. Hello.
That would be easier, wouldn't it?
That would be so much easier.
Yeah.
It's usually 70,000 words or shorter. So I don't think there's any of Harlequin's categories that are above 70,000 words. And a lot of times that's for shelf space, for those of us lucky to be out in print and in actual stores, which is quickly dwindling. It's for me, category is trope heavy, shorter word count, and faster reads. They're not as involved as, say, like what I write for single title, where I have, my editor gives me control over what my word count is, write it till the story's done. You can't do that with a category romance because it has to fit into a certain expected word count, which helps the reader decide how long is this going to take me to read, kind of thing. So it's kind of like, I don't want to say it's shortcut reading, but it's it's just shorter and more easily expected, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I always tell people it's like, it's straight shot, no chaser, like no fluff. You
Yes.
don't need all the fluff.
Yeah, exactly. Because you don't have the word count to play with, right? So I think Jen nailed it on the head. Is that the category that you're reading is, Harlequin did a really good job of flipping that, where they made category kind of an added definition, where it's not only just the category of the genre that you're writing, but it's an actual type of romance.
Yeah. Something that you touched on, Anna, was the imprint. And I shared with you too, like, I know that people are asking questions and people are getting interested in, like, what is this? But, and I'm a Harlequin.com purchaser. And for everything else that I don't order online, I do go to the Walmart and I pick them up there.
Perfect.
But I am seeing less and less. No, definitely. And I will send emails if things don't look how they're supposed to be. I'm that person. But I'm seeing less and less. And so if people are interested, and they're not seeing it because I don't think people don't really think about going onto the website, right? It's either you see it in the
Right.
store or you go on Amazon, but you don't think of going to like harlequin.com. How do we how do we compete with everything that's going on? How do we get people to get the books if they're not seeing them? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I honestly, I wish to God I had an answer. Part of the problem is that it's not up to Harlequin to get it into Walmart. It's up to Walmart to ask for it.
To ask for it. Yeah.
It's up to stores to ask for it, and unless they know to ask for it, when I used to work in a bookstore. Once upon a time, I worked for Walden Books. Anybody out there older
Oh,
than
yeah.
dirt, like
I
I
remember
am?
those.
Yeah. Walden Books with its preferred reader card, which still gives me nightmares when I think about it. But,
I know.
um, but, you know, we, at the time, people would come in, and if we didn't have it in stock, we would special order it. And sometimes, most of the time, we would order more than one, and we would put it on the shelf, because if one person's looking for it, chances are somebody else is looking for it too. So I'm a big believer in, if you want print books, go in and order it at your local Barnes and Noble if they're there. You can't do that with Walmart because that isn't how they operate. You can't do that with Target. I will say they are selling print books online at Walmart and Target, but Walmart apparently has recently decided that they're cutting their shelf space for paperbacks, which just guts me, because that was always the dream, right? Is you want to see your books. And I've been lucky with Romantic Suspense, is so far we've still been in print in stores.
Mm-hmm.
But where stores used to carry 6 to 10 copies of every title, you're lucky now if they carry 2 copies of every title. So I don't know, maybe it's on our part. I think also I'm still a print book buyer.
Yeah.
I don't, if I'm reading on my Kindle, it's probably something I've already read, and it's a keepsake book. So I haven't been able to make the transition for new books on Kindle. So I think I think we're kind of caught in a whirlwind right now where people are buying so much digital. And then Harlequin, if you're buying directly from Harlequin, they have their own reading app or something, Gloss or whatever it is, which I don't use, and it's very glitchy. And when it isn't easy to use, I think it can cause some problems, which sends people to other places to look for the books. So that's a really long way of saying I don't think I have an answer to that, unless we're just more proactive, the authors, I mean, being sure where to tell people to find our books.
Yeah. The Walmart that I go to that's closest to me, the book section now fills mostly romance now, and it is trade paperback, illustrated covers. And I've noticed that my Harlequin section is shrinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even get the 2 heartwarmings I used to get. For maybe like 2 months, I was getting historicals. They're not there anymore. I think I see 1 intrigue, maybe 1 romantic suspense, maybe 1 love inspired suspense, maybe 2 special edition titles, and maybe 3 presents. And I'm like, there used to be way more than this, And I'm like, well, I understand Afterglow being their response to what I'm seeing, because it looks like it's going to fit in with everything else. But I'm like, how do my categories, which are now on the bottom shelf, and there's fewer and fewer, in a world where romance, it just feels like is like shifting to something. How does that, how do I scream from the rooftops to people like, hey, I know you're into this and we have this here too. It may not look like this, but it's here. And I guess I think of you as authors, like, how do you say that too?
Jen, you got any ideas?
I know we got quiet again, didn't we? So I think, well, like this podcast, like obviously that's a great way to let people know what's out there. And the nice thing with Afterglow and those trade paperbacks with the illustrated covers, I do have kids, and I have three daughters, and they're 2 20-somethings and 1 19-year-old. So they're all young adults. And all 3 of them read romance, and they read those those trade paperbacks with the, like I get everybody a book for Christmas, and that's what I went and found for them. And so, if we're going to survive as as an industry, we need to bring new readers in all the time, and we need to bring in those readers who are new. Now, I think we can't forget about people who, don't write, the 20 something, meet cute. Although my daughters love them, and I think they're adorable books, um and some of them are they're all fabulous. um but I'm happy to see them reading romance.
Mm-hmm.
And if I tried to, and one thing I actually like to do in my books is I want to have like older heroes and heroines.
Mhm.
I am, I guess, of a certain age, although I just told you I have like, 20 something kids. So obviously I'm of a certain age. So I don't necessarily want personally to read about, yet another 25-year-old. If I want, in fact, sometimes when I write about them, I will listen to my daughters talk about, like, dates and who they went out with and what's going on the app or whatever. But if I get to, I like to write characters who are in their 40s or sometimes even in their 50s, because that's still something out, with,
Oh yeah.
yeah, right. So I want those readers to keep reading romances, people who started reading romances when they were, in their 20s, and maybe it was the 80s or the 90s, and they and maybe they lost interest because that age category wasn't there for them.
Mhm.
But so I mean, we can't forget about our readers who aren't 20 somethings, for sure. And we need to make sure that people know that those books are still out there. But if the appetite of a younger reader is for something that, like, in the 90s we called chick lit, remember that? Those
Mhm.
were fun books. But if it's something a little, more, like the quotient effect, is that the name of the book? One of my daughters read it and she was like, I haven't started it yet, but they're like, this is the best book ever. And the kiss quotient,
Kiss
that's what it is.
quotient.
Kiss
Yeah. Okay.
quotient, that's what it is. But yeah, one of my daughters read that. She's like, this is the best book ever, Mom, you have to read it. And I've heard it from other people, I just haven't started it yet. But if those are the kind of books that are going to get them to read romance, they'll start reading the category romance. They'll be like, oh, I like a little intrigue. I want a serial killer in my book. So
Yeah,
they'll
one
go to
can
the
only hope.
romantic suspense, or they'll be like, um, you know, doctors and nurses and EMTs and firefighters are sexy. Let's go read a medical romance. And so, the more people we get involved in the industry, the healthier the industry is. And we just have to make sure that we do keep track of, it's not just the new
Yeah.
shiny
Mhm.
thing, right? Like the industry has been built on these categories, and we can't forget about them.
Exactly. Yeah. You
Does that
hear
all
so
make
many
sense?
authors. You hear so many authors all over that are like, "Oh, I grew up reading category," and it's like, well, it's still
Mhm.
here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think adding on that, I think Jen makes the absolute great point is everybody's all ooh new shiny and yay we got this new line that's hopefully going to attract these new readers, but I will forever be grateful that there were so many different. I read across the category genre when I discovered romance. Silhouette Intimate Moments, which became romantic suspense, was my favorite line, but I read Desires. Lindsay McKenna and Diana Palmer's early Desires. I was reading those when they first came out. And you had Nora Roberts when she wrote for Silhouette Special Edition. And, you had the Shadow series, which came and went in the blink of an eye, but they were paranormal. So there's always been so much offered by category romance. And yet it always kind of seems to get pushed to the back when something new and shiny and pretty comes out. And it's kind of like, there's one reason Harlequin has survived as long as it has, is because it's steadfast in, for the most part, keeping those categories front and center, right? That's their bread and butter, is to have fast turnover and have tons and tons and tons of books every year that can feed a reader's appetite like that. We just need the readers who are willing to glom onto it. And, I don't know if there is if there's a disconnect between, when young women and men, because men read romance too, Jen's daughter's ages, if they hear now they wouldn't hear it this way because their mother writes for Harlequin, so they wouldn't interpret it this way. But if they hear Harlequin, what do they think when they think Harlequin?
Yeah.
And I think over the years, Harlequin's tried really hard to start a new campaign to say, they had that whole "Not Your Grandmother's Harlequin" ad. And I think some people thought that was really clever. I thought it was really obnoxious personally, because I was reading my grandmother's Harlequins, and if I wasn't reading my grandmother's Harlequins, I wouldn't be writing for Harlequin now. So,
oh, Anna, I feel like you and I have I bet you we have a very similar romance writer origin story, because my grandmother she was a voracious reader, only read romances, didn't refer to them as a romance novel, only called them Harlequins.
right.
I didn't know until I was in college that there were other publishers of romance that weren't Harlequin, to be honest with you. And my grandma read this book, and she was twice widowed, put it on, pressed it to her chest. And she's like, if I could find, she's 70 some odd years old. If I could find a man like that, I would get married again. Hands it to me, and she says, read it.
Read it.
Yeah. And it was a medical romance, and it definitely wasn't it was the spiciest thing I had ever read at 12 or 13, but it's nothing compared to what's out there. And it was a doctor, hero, nurse, heroine. And I got done reading that book, and I'm like, this is what I want. And it's not necessarily to go cop a feel in the hallway, stairwell of a hospital. I mean, I guess it depends on what the doctor's like, but I was like, I want to write these books.
Yeah.
This is the kind of book I want to write. I want to write books that when people put them down, they're like, oh, I believe in love. There's hope in the world. Things are beautiful. So, yeah.
That put it to your chest moment, like your grandma had.
Yeah,
exactly.
And there's reason I wasn't like, I need a man like this. I'm like, I need a career like this.
A career like this. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I think category romance kind of gets pigeonholed and dismissed as if it, this is the other thing that I meant to say. There is no formula to writing a category romance. If there was a formula, everybody would be published in it who wanted to be. It's beyond, I mean, yes, there's, sure, boy meets girl, stuff happens. There should be conflict. Please God, there should be conflict in the story, because it drives me. There's a whole Twitter thing going on about that right now, or whatever you call Twitter these days. But it's I completely forgot what I am so in my 50s. You can totally tell, because
no, you were talking about conflict. It's okay.
Conflict,
I got
thank you. So it's there is no formula to writing a good romance. It's about voice and story and characters who respect one another and who want the best for one another. But how you tell the story is completely up to you. And people who think that, I can just I can write a Harlequin in a couple of weeks, no problem. Yeah, I dare anybody who actually says that to sit down and try to do it and submit it and get it published. Now, granted, we're living in the age of you can go ahead and publish whatever you want, because self-publishing is that kind of thing. But if you want to succeed in category, there is an expectation of competence, for want of a better term. And it's not a formula. I don't sit down with a formula that says, okay, by this page, this has to happen. By this page, this has to happen. It comes naturally, I think, after you've written a couple of them. You know what the beats are. You know what part of the story you have to hit at a certain time. That's not a formula. That's habit. And that's just how story goes.
Yeah.
So I think when people are referring to romance, a lot of times what people are hearing is, or category romance, people are hearing, oh, that's just the formula where they churn out the books. You know, they must be really easy to write because they're churning out so many of them. No, they're churning out so
Oh
many of
yeah.
them because so many authors are really good
At
at
doing it.
story.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm looking at, or I was noticing Tara Taylor Quinn this year has a book coming out every month. For
Yeah.
2023, she had a book out every month. And number one is
Isn't that
because
That's
crazy?
crazy.
I
it's
mean, yeah,
insane, but
yeah.
it's because she's really good at what she does.
It's a
She sits
skill.
down,
It's a skill.
it is a skill, and the more you use it, the easier, and the not easier it necessarily becomes, because every book has its own challenges, but it's a muscle that you exercise, and the more you exercise, in a way, the kind of the easier it is. So I think when people hear category, they shortcut it to, oh, these must be lesser than, where in actuality, writers have to write more succinctly. They have a fewer word count to get the story across. It has to be more impactful. You have to draw the author in. It has so many different things you have to do with a category romance that you don't have as much space with to do with a single title.
Yeah.
And single title meaning 100,000 words or more, which is what single title tends to be.
My favorite thing is like I try to tell people, usually whether there's like a prologue or first chapter, you're getting so much. And when I end up reading a single title, I'm like, oh my God, it's 4 chapters in and I don't really know what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just love that you know what's going on right off the bat. Okay, now
Yeah.
here's the story. Um, and we talked a little bit about tropes. I think I see a lot of I'll see sometimes on Twitter, it's like the put out there message of like, this is the trope that you're going to get. Some people aren't necessarily fans of, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, if you're reading romance, you're reading trope heavy books. We're
Yeah.
just being honest about what you're going to get so you can make the decision of
Yeah.
if that's what you want to read or not. So do you
Right.
think that that is maybe something that I think personally should be or could be a draw to category, but do you think laying it all on the line is maybe too much for some people?
Um, you know what? I mean, there's all types of readers, like there's all types of writers, and there's all types of books. And the one thing that always sort of bugs me with just in general with romance is everybody's like, well, you know how the book's going to end, right? The love interest, they're going to get together and they're going to live happily ever after. And but like if you pick up a mystery, you know how that's going
You
to
know how it's
end. They're
gonna
going to
end.
figure
Yeah.
out who the killer
Mm-hmm.
is. If you pick up a suspense, you know how that's going to end. The CIA agent is going to stop before the bad guy blows up the world. Like, you know how other books are going to end. Don't give me because romance is has a happy ever after that it's less than. And
Mm-hmm.
but your point's interesting. I'll have to think about it. I mean, that might be why some people it doesn't connect with some people. I don't know. Yeah, could be.
I think we're in an era of everything just ticks everybody off, and
Yeah.
they feel the need to complain
That
about
could
it.
be too.
Yeah. This is very true.
Honestly, our filters are gone.
Yeah.
I mean, they're gone, and I think social media hasn't helped that at all. It used to be, I was raised with the if you can't see something nice, don't say anything at all. Well, if that was the case, we wouldn't have social media at all.
Yeah.
Um, but I think yeah, I think there's a lot of ingredients that goes into the issue. I think perception is one of them. Romance gets kicked around so much, I think primarily because it is a women driven industry. It is
Mhm.
primarily written by women, it's primarily read by women, so it must be easily dismissed because those women, they don't think so good. you know that's that's still a perception that we're dealing with. uh, um, so
That's
it,
true also.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's such an inherent sexism about the misogyny and vitriol that comes out against romance. And I'm like, you know what? You spend half your life, most people spend half their lives looking for somebody to spend their life with. They're raising their kids either on their own and they end up merging families. they find themselves in situations where they meet somebody who ends up coming into their lives and changing their lives, and they move on together. That's all romance. 99% of the people on this planet live out a romance. So what the hell is the matter with reading about it? That's always been,
Yeah.
there's so many movies that people love, but the central story of it is actually a romance, but that isn't what they refer to when they're talking about the movie. So clearly this is a issue I have that I need to work through.
No.
Might have to start up with therapy again, but it's I think there's a lot of ingredients going into the question that you're actually answering. And I think honestly, a lot of it has to do with education. And, back in the day when Romance Writers of America was at its peak, we were really good about educating readers at large, not just romance readers, about, hey, here we are, this is what we do. And I think we've lost that since RWA has gone through its issues lately. And it's become a lot easier to keep punching down on romance, even as romance is punching way up and earning a hell of a lot more than any of the other genres. And that's the other thing I think that ticks the naysayers off is how much profit romance publishers and authors can make.
Yeah.
How do you two feel like the current, how romance feels right now as two writers of romantic suspense? How do you feel like its moment in the genre right now? Like, what does it feel like for you two?
I love what I do. I
Mm-hmm.
think that and one of the reasons probably why people pick on romance is, it is the biggest, it is the most profitable fiction genre out there. And I think if we weren't, it would be probably just dismissed, and people wouldn't worry about it. So I'm pretty happy to be part of you know I, the word that comes to mind is juggernaut, and I'm not positive that's the word I want to use, but like, we're romance isn't going anywhere.
Right.
And things will change, something will come up. Like, there was the 50 Shades of Gray era 10 years ago, and if it's the illustrated covers era right now, like, that's fine. And then some of the people who got started reading romance because of 50 Shades of Gray, like, they might still like that really spicier kind of story, but they then became like romance readers. And if we get people in for this newer thing that's exciting and fun, and we'll keep them, you know or hopefully we keep them in the genre reading the books.
So I think I feel pretty good about where romance is right now. I'm very happy to see I think the added attention that has finally been brought onto authors of color and LGBTQ stories. The more inclusive romance has gotten in the last few years, I think has really been of huge benefit to the genre in general. And it's made me even more proud to be a romance author. And I am always proud to be a romance. I've wanted to be a romance author since I was 13 years old and I picked up my first romance book. That was what I wanted to do. So for me, it's never been a matter of, oh, I write romance. No, it's like, I write romance. And I'm proud to say it. And I've been very proud of our genre in general over the last few years. In the stories that are rising to the top and bringing more attention to the genre. There's been a lot more crossover and a lot more normalcy paid to the types of characters that are being written about in romance novels. So in that aspect, I'm really, really pleased. I am not a fan of the cartoon covers at all. I never have been, but that's just a personal preference for me. And because I buy print, it honestly means I buy fewer books. I judge a book by its cover, but I also, as I'm writing more and I'm moving more toward romantic suspense and thrillers and maybe even horror. I'm playing around with some ideas.
Ooh.
Yeah. That it helps, whatever's going on in the genre kind of helps me determine where I'm going in my career. I like the grittier covers and stuff like that. So that's just a personal preference. But I think as long as what's going on in the industry is benefiting the industry and benefiting the writers in particular, I think, yeah, I feel pretty good about where we are right now.
Yeah. And you know what? I have to say, I 1000% agree that making sure that there is representation in the romance novels, not just in novels, but with the people who write them, is huge, huge. And
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think, and and I am actually I read kind of a lot of different genres, but I feel like although romance is obviously where I spend most of my time, but I don't know that I know of other genres that are actively trying to do that and are actively
Mm-hmm.
promoting,
Very true.
the
Yeah.
Yeah.
LGBTQ, the authors of color, like I'm not sure that there's another genre out there doing that. I could be completely wrong,
No,
and
I
if I
agree.
am,
I agree too. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I read
No.
a lot of cozy mysteries too, and I'm like, I don't feel like, maybe I just don't pay enough attention, but I'm like, I don't feel like the cozy mystery genre celebrates diversity and inclusion as much as
yeah,
romance does, Like I
Yeah.
honestly know probably I can count on one hand how many authors of color I know that write cozy mysteries, and again,
yeah,
that just
yeah.
maybe because I'm not paying that much attention, but it's like, yeah, it's just not screamed about, I feel like, as much. Um Romantic suspense wise, what is the draw? What do you two love about writing it? And as
Mm.
time progresses, I have an idea like that it may get, I don't want to say easier to write the bad guys cuz technology, like I just feel like the world is y'all's oyster. But can you talk about the enjoyment of like writing romance but that dark twisted twist to it?
I have found the more romantic suspense that I write, the more I enjoy hurting people, for want of a better term. It is so cathartic to, I mean, well, and with category, and this is one thing with category romantic suspense, is that you have to be very careful with the language that you use and how dark you go and how cruel things can be in that particular story. I'm writing both for category for, I mean, I'm obviously writing Harlequin romantic suspense, but I've also been lucky enough to write for a small press the last couple of years where I am writing single title romantic suspense, where my editor literally said, write whatever you want. And oh my God, I did not realize just how much I needed to purge. Um, the level of evil that apparently I can trap into, it it's exhilarating because I, like I said, I guess I didn't realize it was inside of me and needed a way to get out. But you know, I am not a romantic comedy movie girl. I am an action, adrenaline rush, psychological thriller movie person. So I like that rush of excitement and the unknown and unraveling a mystery all at the same time, and throwing a romance into that where it complicates the issue, because you know what, when you're being chased by a serial killer, finding the time for sexy time really isn't that easy, and it isn't that practical. But the intensity of it
Yeah.
just kind of keeps you riding on that roller coaster. I'll give an example. So I remember it must have been 1984, seeing Terminator for the first time. And this is the original Terminator that launched Arnold Schwarzenegger's Linda Hamilton, and it's Michael Biehn, who I never understood why he didn't become more of a star than he is. He was my first romantic crush hero, action hero wise, right? He was in that, and he was in Aliens and The Rock, and he's done a bunch of other stuff. But in the Terminator, that love scene between Linda Hamilton and Michael Biehn when they're being chased down by the Terminator and they have that hotel room. And that was an absolute aha moment for me. And I can remember exactly where I was when I saw that movie. And, all my friends sitting around me are all giggling and, they're having sex or whatever. And I'm just thinking, this is such a great story because it was everything in that story. It was suspense and action and fear and terror and what's going to happen next. And it really kind of set the bar for action movies that came afterwards, right? But for me, the core of that story was the relationship between those two characters and the fact, he dies at the end. Spoiler alert for those who haven't seen Terminator. And then she ends up pregnant at the end and she's going off to save humanity, right? So to me, I think that was probably the start of my obsession with romantic suspense, because it's interspersing that growing relationship with dangerous and intense situations that most of us are never going to find ourselves in, right? So it's also the fantasy of it. And so yeah, that's really what draws me to it. And it's cathartic.
What
Yes.
about you, Jen?
I've always been a romantic suspense novel fan. Like that's what I gravitate towards. And I started out my career writing historical romance. In fact, and they had an awful lot. They were gladiator romances. So there was an awful lot of that action for sure, and a little bit of the adventure in it, and hopefully a lot of, adrenaline pumping kind of scenes in there. And I liked and I love holiday romances, and I liked the idea of writing a romantic suspense set at Christmas. And I happened to be at an RWA conference in New Jersey, and had talked to my current editor at Harlequin before at a different conference, and I said, hi, how are you? Do you remember me? And she was, whether she remembered me or not, she was sweet enough to say she remembered me. And I said, I have an idea for another book, and she was nice enough to sit down with me and like talk about like not just my very loose idea, but like what exactly would work, and what Harlequin expectations would be. And it ended up being my first Harlequin novel. But I do love the action adventure. I do love also writing the bad guy. Like they're so complicated. And here's what I actually like about writing the bad guy is the bad guy never views himself or herself as the villain, right? Like
Right.
what they're doing makes sense to them. They're doing it for a reason. They might not have a lot of scruples about the fact that they're hurting other people, but like there's something that they want to accomplish. And it might be cruel, it might be twisted to everybody else, it definitely will hurt people, but they have their own motivations. And I do find that just fascinating to sit down and sort of think through. And then, like I said, my husband's an FBI agent, so doing the federal law enforcement came very easily. We've been married for 27 years, so he was an agent for a few years before we met. And so that's been part of our relationship the whole way through. And then I get to do fun stuff. And I swear to God, I'm not making this up. I call him at one point when I was writing the book that came out in, no, it comes out in January. So the book that comes out in January. And I said, what's the back of a police car really look like? I've seen it in movies or whatever, but I've never been in one. And I'm like, do they have that mesh between the front seat and the back seat? Is it plexiglass with holes? What's it really like? And he tells me, first of all, it's either one, like both are actually accurate. And so I could do whatever I wanted to that made it better for my story. So I put the mesh because they hand things back and forth to each other. And he's like, do you need anything else? And I'm like, yeah, milk and bread, pick it up on your way home. And so it became, very easy. And then my husband doesn't tend to read, or my husband doesn't read my books. But there are definitely times where I'm like, okay, let me read this to you, or here are these pages. Does this make sense? Is this how it would go?
Mm-hmm.
And, like I'm writing fiction. So there, it might be like, tweak this, that would never happen. But for the most part, it's plausible. And I'm like, okay, plausible is good, like as long as it's in the realm of possibility,
Yeah.
and it could happen, I'll go with it. But sometimes you need things to be a little bit more exciting because of that conflict, right? Nobody wants to
Right.
read a book about somebody sitting around and filling out reports. So, and like my husband being an FBI agent, big cases, one person would investigate one thing, they'd fill out a report, send it to somebody else who's closer location wise to another
Mm-hmm.
thing, and then that's how the investigation gets built. And a lot of times, like, my one character is doing all of the things, and although
Mm-hmm.
never filling out a report, because again, those are boring. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing for me is when I went through a huge true crime phase where because you didn't have true crime cable channels when I was growing up. You had the true crime section of the bookstore.
Mhm.
So because this is before the internet. And I remember reading John Douglas's Mindhunter,
Oh yeah.
which is the book that they based the TV series on. And romantic suspense fans, if you have not watched Mindhunter, get your butts on Netflix right now and watch those 2 seasons. Sadly, they aren't getting a third one, which just makes me so mad. But it's based on a book written by John Douglas, and John Douglas actually started the profiling program at the FBI.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating look back at those days, and it really started because of the Atlanta child murders that were
Oh my
taking place.
gosh, yeah.
And it was, and also in that book, I was reading this book right when I graduated from college, because my best friend and I were taking a 3-week trip to England to celebrate me actually graduating. And I didn't have there were no Kindles at that time, so I was loading in the books, and that was one of the books I was reading, and we ended up passing it around the tour bus, because people were running out of
Oh,
stuff to read.
fun.
And I'm like, well, I just finished this true crime book, here, read this.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of research, and I actually almost went into profiling because I was so fat, and that follows my pattern of when I was in college. I would change majors depending on what heroine of what story I was reading. Kay Scarpetta made me want to be a criminal, a coroner. And I'm like, yeah, but it's a med school, so that took that out of the
Yeah.
picture.
Yeah.
But I think that's one reason I gravitate toward. And the reviews that I'm getting on my Circle of the Red Lily series, which Exposed is out now and Vanished comes out in a couple of weeks, it's a love letter to those kinds of research things that I get to do, secret societies and FBI agents. And it also gives me the opportunity, I don't have an FBI husband, Jen. So if you
Oh.
could put yours on speed dial for me, I might
Yes,
be calling you.
absolutely. Call and ask. Call anytime. Absolutely.
But here's the benefit of being a part of a great community of writers is I tend to email my friend Allison Brennan, who writes amazing thrillers, and she primarily writes about the FBI. So I'm like, okay, so for this third book that I'm going to be starting, I have a hero who I need to have been an FBI agent at one point. He now works as a consultant, but in what capacity would he be brought in to work on a specific case, kind of thing. So we go back and forth on that for a little bit until I find something, like you said, Jen, is plausible. Maybe not like absolutely what would happen, but at least it would be plausible. And then you fit it into the story that you're creating. So, having an excuse to watch something like Mindhunter or to read different true crime books like Anne Rule used to right, and dissecting the criminal mind and what's behind those motivations, which I'm so glad you mentioned that, Jen, because I give a
Yeah.
whole workshop actually on motivation for
Oh.
writers for digging deep on motivation. And it's especially important for villains because it's not just enough for them to be evil. There has to be a reason why they're doing what they're doing. And otherwise it's just lazy, right? You want layers to those villains, and being able to research into all kinds of stuff and hope that the FBI isn't actually monitoring your search engine.
Yeah.
Because that comes in a lot. I worry. I have to put out disclaimers on social media just in case. Just
Just in
researching a new
case.
book. I'm really not planning on, blowing up Echo Park in Los Angeles, but whatever. So it's writing romantic suspense for me really fills all of those interests that I have as a consumer of media products. And it gives me that outlet, and it's just so fun because you get to create it, and you get to you get to decide what happens. It's awesome.
Well, I'm glad that y'all touched on that because my next question was like the ideas, like how do they come to you? Is it you spiraling down a certain rabbit hole, spending an entire Saturday binging something? Like I just imagine you all as romantic suspense writers, like being in the grocery store and like stopping with your buggy and being like, I wonder if this guy is stealing something or he's the head of a drug gang. Like how does it how does it typically happen? Because like Anna, you described one of yours as like I just started watching Blue Bloods because it comes on Up TV.
Mm.
And it's like, were you watching that show? Like rewatching it and like, I wonder if anybody's ever done a romance novel series with this, and all of a sudden the idea comes to you. Like, how does it? Because I'm like, how do romantic suspense writers sleep at night when they have like this like kind of dark and twisted side, but it's also going to be some romance and a happy ever after. But like that dark and twisted side is there. How do they come to you, or like what's the most random way that an idea for one of these books has come to you guys?
Oh my
So the
gosh.
series I'm working on currently, like I said, has a serial killer who's a descendant of Jack the Ripper, and then he wants to be the most famous serial killer of all time, and which does bring in like all the media stuff, right? So but that idea actually came to me um, driving to the last conference, or well, I guess RWA's had other conferences, but in 2019, like the last big RWA conference was in New York City. I live in upstate New York. I rode up to the conference with two friends who are local, and one of them said something to the effect, like we start talking, we're just chatting, and one of them says, you know, um, they were able to do DNA and they figured out who Jack the Ripper is. I'm like,
Mm.
oh my god,
Oh my
that's
gosh.
fascinating. I like it, and then I guess as a kid, like I loved to be scared, and Jack the Ripper terrified me, but in the best way, right? Um, so I was like, oh my gosh, that's fascinating. And then it just so happened that that evening I was meeting my editor at Harlequin, and we were having drinks, and I said, did you know they used DNA to figure out who Jack the Ripper was? And she's like, oh my gosh, I didn't. And I'm like, I said, I want to write something about that. And she's like, oh, you should. And then we kind of brainstormed some things that could be done. And I wrapped up the last series that I had written, and or I was in the middle of writing, and then I started on this one. And yeah, so just little things come to you, and there is that, like, press that idea to your chest moment, like, oh, this
Mm.
is it, this is something I can work with. So that's how that happened for me.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any one place. I get ideas from everywhere. So you just wanted to know about one. And as I was making notes as Jen was telling her story, which, oh my God, the whole Jack the Ripper thing, I could talk to you forever about Jack the Ripper because I have
Okay,
such an
right, yeah.
obsession with him. I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, digress. That's a different podcast. But like say for Vanished, or no, Exposed, the first book in my Red Lily series, that literally came about. I knew I wanted to write something about old Hollywood because that's always been an interest and an obsession with mine. I have the same birthday as Marilyn Monroe, and growing up, to me, that was always
Ooh.
just so awesome.
I
Although
love
it means
her.
absolutely nothing. But I read tons of biographies about the old Hollywood studio system and all that kind of stuff. So when my small press editor said, "What do you want to write?" I'm like, well, I have this idea for an old Hollywood. And she says, "Great, I want it." I'm like, "Okay, so I need an idea." So I'm watching an episode. So I'm like, "Okay, sure, I'll come up with something." So my mother and I were in the middle of rewatching White Collar, which is one of my all-time favorite
Oh yeah.
shows. And there is an episode where Willie Garson's character, Mozzie, is buying an old storage unit because, it's a thing that people do where they auction off abandoned storage units, and then people come in, bid on them, and buy them, and then they sell off all the junk that's in there. So he bids on this old storage unit, and it's filled with photography equipment. And as we're watching this episode, all of a sudden this idea in my head just starts clicking, and I'm like, what would you find in a storage unit like that could set off an event that could, launch a series? Because that was the other thing. She says, "I want at least 3 to 5 books." And I'm like, okay, so I need something that's going to sustain it for that long. And that's where I came up with the idea of, she comes across, that's how my heroine becomes a photographer. And her side hobby is she collects old film that has never been developed. So she has contacts. She's a paparazzi working in Hollywood. That's how she makes her money. She hates the job, but her side thing is this hobby of, developing film that was completely lost and forgotten. And when she comes across this canister of film, which, sidebar, I got to do a ton of research as to how you actually develop film, film that we used to get out of a camera rather than just a cell phone picture. And she, as I'm writing this out and coming up with ideas, I'm like, oh, it's photographic evidence of a murder conviction that apparently was wrong, because the evidence she's looking at contradicts everything that was in the case.
Right.
So,
that's fascinating.
And it's a case that goes back, I think it goes back, what is it, like 20 years. So and she has issues with the police from things that she's witnessed. So who's the worst person for her to fall in love with? A cop, especially a cop whose father might have worked that original case. Ooh, and that father is now a police commissioner. So that's literally where that idea came from, was watching Mozzie step into that storage unit. And that story went off in one direction, and my brain went off in a completely different one. And that's how the Circle of the Red Lily was born.
Wow.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So now I've got
that conflict, right? That conflict you were talking about. Awesome.
Yeah, and it builds, and it's going to be 5 books, and we meet all of the heroines in the first book, and then book 2, I had a lot of times these ideas come when you have questions that you want to know the answers to. So for the second book, I knew I wanted to write about a twin, and her sister went missing 8 years before. So what's the best way to do that? You tie it into the disappearances that they uncover from book 1, so that they each start building on each other, and they each answer a different question that I might not know the answer to, but that I'm interested in investigating and figuring out myself, and then working it into a story.
Disappearances is like my favorite. I will digest all of that in true crime. And I don't know what it is, because it scares the heck out of me. The fact that people just kind of like walk off the face of the earth. Yeah. I love it so much. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's terrifying, but only in the best of ways.
Yes.
Right? Exactly.
I don't know if it's like back in the day, like Unsolved Mysteries. There was a lot of it on there or what, but it is like my favorite true crime to, like, what happened to these people. I love that. I love that so much. As far as like the category, the Harlequins, do your editors kind of keep you all up to date with like what readers are wanting, or the direction the line is going? Like, where is the romantic suspense line? Like, what can readers kind of expect from it coming up? Like, are there certain tropes? Are there certain tropes that you feel like readers for your romantic suspense with Harlequins just like really crave more than others? Or for any aspiring writers, would you say there are certain tropes that just work really well when it comes to romantic suspense?
Dogs. Readers like dogs.
Okay.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Put a dog in the book. The other thing is Western setting. So like,
Mm-hmm.
like Texas, Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, those kind of things. Um, I particularly like a second chance romance. And one of the reasons I like it is my books tend to be very condensed. So it might,
Mm-hmm.
the whole story might just honestly take place over like 3 or 4 days. And it's kind of hard to be like, oh, they're truly in love
And they
after
Mm-hmm.
just
three or
met.
four days,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, how does that work? But if they, knew each other 3 years before, 20 years before, and then they're shoved into this, you know, crime and this investigation that they have to work through together, then I think it's a little bit more plausible to be, um, you know, yeah, like we had this prior relationship and for whatever reason it didn't work out, but
Mm-hmm.
now we're back together again, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
yeah, and I love a secret baby. I'm not sure that's I'm not sure that necessarily works into a romantic suspense well, but it's just one of my favorites.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I second the whole, uh, for my Honor Brown series, it was actually only supposed to be 3 books, and then all of these secondary characters kept popping up. But it was, the first book, which is More Than a Lawman. It's a friends to lovers, and she's a crime blogger vigilante where she doesn't have any
Mm,
faith in the police, so she investigates cold cases that she believes the police have forgotten about. And of course she's going to fall in love with the cop because conflict. And they were friends, and yes, at one point he saw her in a different way, but it isn't until she's actually in jeopardy that things start clicking and going on. But having that history coming into the story makes writing that kind of relationship so much easier, because you
yeah.
can really put the emphasis on the external plot, because the internal relationship between them is kind of almost going to go naturally. And in the second book in that series, actually it was a second chance, because how and I think, Jen, you hit it right on the head, is how do you intersperse that whole danger element and not, I call it the speed syndrome. By the end time you get to the end of Speed with Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves,
Oh yeah.
all the adrenaline has really pushed them together. Guess what happens in Speed 2? They're no longer together. Let's
Yeah.
forget about what that movie actually was, but in a lot of ways it's unsustainable. So it's a balancing act when you're creating that relationship that's taking place within a really significant amount of danger. But yeah, with the Honor Bound series, I had a lot of reunions, a lot of friends to lovers, and I tend to gravitate toward that a lot. But as far as it's funny, I wrote one of the Coltons of Owl Creek too. So I'm book
Oh
eight.
yeah, yeah.
I'm book 8 in that series, Jen. And I write. I'm a California girl. I write big cities, and I have found all of my Honor Bound series are really primarily set in the area I live in, which is Sacramento, Northern California.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
and when I have to write a Colton book, I always have to do research, because I've never lived in Colorado. I don't know what any of those are. But you asked what readers are looking for. Readers will buy those Colton books like they're
Oh,
drugs.
Yeah.
yeah.
Seriously, they are my
Yeah.
best-selling books. They are the
Mine
books
too.
that earn out the fastest. And I was so thrilled when I was asked to participate in this series, because it's one of those series where Harlequin comes to you, you don't go to them. So uh yeah, I mean, if you're asked to participate in the cult, and it's just like, yes, what do I do? But I think as far as readers, I think dogs, animals are always really good. Uh, I haven't written a whole lot of children in jeopardy, uh, mainly because it's really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
I hate when I'm watching. In fact, I had this happen actually with Miss Marvel. I watched the Marvels yesterday, and I can't remember the cat's name. Goose.
Oh yeah.
I'm watching the cat, and I'm like, if I have to spend this movie worried about the cat, I'm going to be really mad. Which of course, you don't have to worry about Goose, because Goose can take care of himself. But it's just the idea. I had that same problem with the Lethal Weapon movies when he had that dog. I spent the entire time worried about the dog,
Yeah,
and
who's going to come and feed the dog? Yeah.
exactly. So I never want my readers to worry about animals or children. That said, when you add animals and children, it amps up that tension so much. So anybody out there who picks up any of my books, if there is a child or there is an animal of any kind in any of my stories, you never have to worry. They will never be killed.
No, they'll be good.
They will
They're
be
off limits,
perfectly
okay?
fine. Yes.
Can you explain if it's somebody, they've never picked up a category, they haven't picked up a romantic suspense. The Coltons is a big deal in the world of Harlequin romantic suspense, and it's a continuity. Can you explain that?
So sure, they 12 books usually. I've done a continuity with 6,
Mm-hmm.
but each book is written by a different author. We're given Harlequin does, like Anna said, that Harlequin comes to you. They have an idea of how the entire 12 book series is going to be released, or how it's going to work. You're given a basic outline of what needs to happen in the book, and then you can make it your own story, and there's things you can tweak so that it works for you. And but all of these Coltons are somehow related, like the Owl
Mm-hmm.
Creek books. I think it's 5 siblings. Let's see, 5 or 6 siblings.
Yeah, 6 and 6, I think.
Well, I did book 11, and the last 2 are the mom of that is Jenny's twin. So it's
That's
Jesse.
right. That's
And
right.
then is it Robert? Because he died. The
Right.
dad who dies very early on in the series.
We get a whole Bible.
I just love how we talk about these like they are real people. Sometimes I
Yeah,
forget, like
so
we are talking about characters in a book.
So yeah. So anyways, it's a pair of sisters in this continuity in particular, pair of twin sisters marry brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And one sister abandons her children and leaves town, never really to interact with her family, or very rarely. And then the other brother leaves his family temporarily and goes to Boise, Idaho, where they have 2 more children. And so I wrote one of the daughters of that 2 children from the other ones. So there's cousins, there's siblings and cousins, and then but my character is the sibling of every single person there in this Colton group. And she didn't know that they existed until after her father passes away. She didn't know that her mom had other kids. She didn't know her dad had other kids, and so anyways, but they're all these people are somehow related, and every single person writes a different book, and it builds until the very last book, the big bad guy gets caught and brought to justice. And so if you read the first book, that character might show up in the 7th book, he might show up in the 8th book, and yeah.
Yeah,
So that's how that was.
what's really cool about the way that they present it to us is they give us this Bible, and there's like a summary of everything, that kind of like a backstory of stuff. This is how we got here, and then it picks up with book one, and everything that they've mapped out what happens in book one, and then they give you at the bottom, they said these are the threads that you need to connect to either the book that came before or the book that comes after. So it's kind of like a little checklist. But the Coltons in general are about family.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really important. And I think that's one reason why I've always enjoyed the books, is because that's what my books are always about. It's family found, or it's family you're born to. And the Coltons are always all about family. And what I liked about this particular new incarnation of the Coltons of Owl Creek is that this was so out of the box from anything I'd read with the Coltons before. And the external plot that they created with how this family works and relates to one another is so, it's really different, I think, than any of the other Colton series.
Oh yeah.
And they've been doing this Colton series for like a decade. It's been going on for a long time. And you're actually given character. It's like you get a dossier, right? Where they've even picked out the picture of what your character looks like.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So
They have pictures of houses. It's great.
yeah, it's a really fun project to write, and I think this is my third Colton book, and I have fun writing these. The only time I have issues, and I've had to email the editor who's overseeing it, is in my particular one, she had they have my heroine going out on a blind date, and it's a disaster, and the hero is there because he's actually surveilling the guy she's on a date with. So that tells you right away it's not going to go well. And the original idea was that her date was shot and killed because he owed money to a loan shark. And I'm like, I had to email the editor, and I'm like, loan sharks don't kill people because dead people don't pay.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of back and forth with the editor. I'm like, okay, this is something I'm going to be tweaking. So, because you never know whether or not it's something that's stuck in their head and that they're really going to remember that they put this in the synopsis for the story. So I always like to be kind of upfront. Now that said, in one of the other Coltons I wrote, my heroine had amnesia, and they wanted her name to be Jane. And I'm just like, can we give her a different name? Because that's
so
just
she's not
Jane Doe.
She's not Jane Doe.
Yeah.
And they're all like, no, we want her name to be Jane. And I'm like, okay. So I made it a joke, when it came up, and he was all, well, I'm not sure what to call you. And she goes, well, why don't you just call me Jane? So I kind of just flipped it. And I'm like, I'm in on the joke. I know that Jane is the typical thing for Jane Doe.
Yeah.
Let's just be open with it. And it actually worked out a little bit better, but also each Colton book stands on its own.
Yeah.
There might be a thread of an element that you're like, okay, now I'm going to have to go back and read the other stories, which is kind of what the point is. But they do each stand on their own, because each story is a complete romance between that hero and that heroine. So, I think that's really important for people to, when they hear Colton and they hear that it's been going on for 10 years and there's 12 books in this series.
Don't be intimidated.
Like, no,
yeah.
Do not be
read
intimidated.
120 books.
No. And it's, I can't believe none of us have ever run into a Colton, because they're everywhere apparently.
They're all over the place.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
I literally need to get on eBay and see if I can buy somebody has to be selling the entire series.
They probably are.
That would be great. Let us know if you get it. That would be awesome.
I really want to see that now.
Yeah, but they all do stand on their own, so you never have to worry about if you're going to be completely lost or not, because there's always a quick way to catch up. And we write them specifically to stand on their own. There are only a few little threads here and there that thread everything together.
So I have a couple of quick questions I want to ask you before we get off here. So bigger city, small town, which one do you prefer, or perfect world do you think would be, do you enjoy setting your suspense in?
So I think Anna and I are opposite on this. I love the small town. I love small town. I love rural America. I think it gives you, especially with the the serial killer's out there somewhere. If you're, if you're miles from anybody, that adds a little bit of a danger element. And Anna, you said you love writing in the, Northern California city, metropolitan areas, correct?
Yeah, I like writing big cities. I think it's interesting because you're talking about when you're writing small towns, there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
When you're writing a big city, there's everywhere to hide.
Yeah.
And I think
Ooh.
that presents a completely different dichotomy. My Red Lily series takes place in Los Angeles. It takes place in Hollywood, the center of Hollywood. It's about Hollywood studios and Hollywood landmarks in Los Angeles. And Honor Bound is in Sacramento. But for my heartwarmings, I always write small town because that's what heartwarming is all about. But when I have to write a small town in a romantic suspense, I actually start to panic because I'm like, what is there to do in a small town that will allow for the plot to continue?
And I think it's interesting.
It's a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, with big city, it's almost like it's expected, right? Like you live in a city, there's crime. And I think small towns, people want to believe nobody would do that here. And I just think that they both have these like amazing qualities that lend themselves so well to writing romantic suspense, I would think.
Well, yeah. And with a small town, I mean, when those big crimes happen in the small town, they're so much more impactful because everybody's impacted. But when something, the same crime could happen in Sacramento or in Los Angeles, and it's like barely a blip on the radar.
Yeah. Like, another one of those.
Yeah, exactly. So,
for both of you, what is your like favorite true crime to consume? Like I said, mine is like people disappearing. What is yours?
I do find serial killers fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So like if there's like, a John Wayne Gacy documentary on, or when they're, the one guy from the 70s, shoot, Ted Bundy. I can't believe I forgot his name. Like there was a documentary about him, and then the one where Zac Efron played him. I think that was on Netflix a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like I found all of that fascinating. Yeah.
Well, Jed cornered the market on Jack the Ripper. I had such an obsession with Jack the Ripper for a number of years.
Fascinating.
It really is. I think rather than, and serial killers in general, I think it's the psychology behind the examination of these kinds of people, like the John Douglas book Mindhunter that I mentioned. I like the Criminal Minds is one of my absolute favorite shows, and it's not because I like watching what the killer is doing. I like watching how the profiling is being done, and I like the unpuzzling of it. So cold cases for me are catnip. I love cold cases. One of my favorite shows, in fact, we're rewatching it now. It's a British show called New Tricks, and it's kind of a dramedy, as the Brits do so well, but it deals specifically with cold cases. So, and I tend to, now that I think about it, my Honor Bound series all started with a cold case. The Red Lily series is a cold case, and they're all coming back to life. So I think for me, it's cold cases, and it's bringing justice and getting answers for people who think they're never going to get them.
Yeah. Oh, I love cold cases too. I love seeing the show that I've been watching. It's called Disappeared, and a lot of them are cold cases. But it's just seeing the law enforcement say like some of these cases are decades old, and it just sometimes it takes that fresh face and new technology that finally solves it, and it's like, wow, like all it took was this,
or one person asking just the right question.
Yeah.
There was that case lately, and where Patton Oswalt's late wife had started an investigation into a string of killings here in Northern California. I didn't read the book just because I didn't have time to, I don't think. But because his wife started reopening the case, it got the ball rolling, and it got the investigation reopened, and they actually did find the guy.
Wow.
So, things like that. It also renews your hope in the world that, maybe things actually can be okay once in a while.
Like they finally found the Gilgo Beach murder.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you all have a case like I one of my favorite shows is called History's Greatest Mysteries, and they did one. Lawrence Fishburne is the host, and he does fantastic. But one of the recent they did this last season was on the Black Dahlia, and I was like, I hope they get justice for her. Like, it's been forever, but I still have hope that they figure it out.
Catherine Short, that I actually refer to that in my Red Lily books, because that was another element of the Hollywood history and the Los Angeles history I wanted to bring in. That was another one. Leonard Elmore wrote a great book, Black Dahlia, which was a fictionalized version. They turned it into a movie that was
awesome.
The movie was horrible, but the book was fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
It's that LA Confidential kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Black Dahlia, I forgot about that. That's one of my favorite cold cases.
Yeah.
If you can have one. That sounds so strange to say.
I know it does.
Yeah, I have a favorite cold case. Do you?
You know, the case that you're like holding out hope for, like, before I die, can somebody solve this?
Right. Exactly.
Well, Jen, let's start with you. Where can everyone keep up with you online?
So I have a website, Jen Bokal, BOKAL.com. I'm on X at Jen Bokal, and Instagram, Jennifer.d.Bokal, and then Jennifer Bokal on Facebook.
Okay. And Anna, what about you?
My website is authorannastewart.com. You can find all my social media links there. I'm primarily on Facebook and Instagram. I'm trying to get better at Instagram. Follow me on Twitter at your own risk. If you're still there. I refuse to call it X. I can't do it.
Oh.
It's still Twitter to me. I'm sorry.
Twitter to you.
I am a rebel. But so yeah, website is the best place to find everything.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you. This was lovely.
Thank you for having us.